Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, college football fans across the nation and around the world. This is Tim May with the Tim May Podcast, and I've got a special co-pilot this week. First time he's been at the controls. He's been through flight training, though, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, I do refer to this, Andy, as my own personal cockpit. But Andy Backstrom, semi-new to on3.com and to lettermenrow.com. Welcome for the first time to the Tim May Podcast.
Thanks for having me on, Tim.
And don't touch any of the buttons, man, unless I tell you to, okay? You could send us into a tailspin for which we would never probably recover. But that's another podcast for another day. Andy, I wanted to introduce you to the folks because I've kind of felt remiss that I haven't had you on. You know, you joined us basically the 1st of November. You had been covering Boston College for a few years, right? Do I have that right?
Yeah, I've been covering them for 6 years, actually, dating back to when I was an undergrad student there. So
Golly,
it was
man.
quite the different beat. I'll say that. Very, very different scene there.
Back when you were an undergrad there, 4 years ago? I mean, golly, man. What are you, 20? How old are you, 20?
24 turning 25.
Yeah, I'm 68 turning 74. But anyway, by the way, welcome. I think you've done great work I think you were doing great work at Boston College. Hey, but who cares, right? Now you're covering Ohio State, and that is quite the jump, isn't it? I mean, from the standpoint of eyeballs on you, reading what you're writing, paying attention to what you're saying, and you and Spencer and myself, and sometimes Matt Parker get together on some of those post-practice rapid reactions and things like that. It is an interesting fishbowl, isn't it?
Certainly, because with Boston College, if they're winning 7 or 8 games, people are entertained and pretty content with that. There'll be a sleeper pick in the ACC every so often. But here, if Ryan Day loses 1 or 2 games, the world's ending. So it's just a completely different atmosphere. Also in Boston, it's a pro sports city. It's a city of champions, as they like to call it. It's Boston Celtics. There's the Patriots, of course, and then even the Bruins and the Red Sox command so much of that market. College football doesn't have too much room to grow, even though Boston College is the only FBS program in that area. There's just really not as much interest. What has to line up is that BC has to be really good and the Patriots have to be really bad.
Yeah.
And for the last 20 years, the Patriots are almost never bad, and BC has had limited success. Their one great year in 2007, which seemed to be everyone's great year, in the weirdest year of college football, at least in my lifetime. BC was number 2 at one point after going undefeated through, I believe, the first 8 games. But then they lost to Florida State at home, and things kind of got off the rails there. That was with Matt Ryan. But even that season, of course, that's when the Patriots went undefeated in the regular season and almost went perfect for the whole season, giving the 72 Dolphins a run for their money. So it's just a tough market. It's really dominated by pro sports. It's a tough position for a school like Boston College to join the ACC in 2005 and trying to get that entertainment, get that eyes, the eyeballs on the screen. But it's just hard to compete when you're going against teams down south where that is the popular sport. College football is king.
Yeah, well, don't bring up Boston College to my friend Keith Byers, 1984, the Hail Mary Doug Flutie threw down in the Orange Bowl Stadium. Keith Byers, running back for Ohio State, then had a fabulous year that year, although he suffered a high ankle sprain near the end of it, which cost him the Heisman Trophy because he could have really put some numbers up at the end of the year. Meanwhile, Doug Flutie had a tremendous career. I think when he left college, I think he was the all-time leading passer in major college history in terms of yardage, et cetera. So he didn't just back into the Heisman with a Hail Mary. But the bottom line is it didn't sit well with Keith Byers to this day, as he says Doug Flutie still has his Heisman. But it's really funny. I told you when I was a volunteer at the U.S. Open this year at Brookline at the Country Club, and our parking spot every day, we took a little shuttle bus over to the Country Club. Parking spot was on one of Boston College's football practice fields, and can't imagine Ohio State letting people park on their their hallowed ground, which is their football practice fields. But hey, real quick before I wanted to let people know, I've got Gary Stokan, the executive director of the Peach Bowl, coming on here in just a few minutes. Just talking about Ohio State playing in the Peach Bowl for the first time ever. It's funny, this Peach Bowl has been around since 1968, but this is the first time Ohio State will have played in this game. And I think I've been to almost every bowl game of repute. And this will be the first time going to the Peach Bowl covering Ohio State. But he's interesting guy, man. And we'll get into him in a minute. But what has been from a football sense, like you touched on it a minute ago, Ohio State lost one game this year. And of course, it was to the arch rival for the second straight year, which enhances or exacerbates is the better term, the scar that leaves and stuff. But what is the thing you found out about Ohio State football just in a month and a half of covering it that you kind of were, maybe you thought it might be that way, but not like that much, or maybe it's not as much this way as you thought?
I think it's when they're playing an opponent that is perceived as much lesser than them, which is most of their regular season opponents. It's almost as if they're playing an FCS team where they're judged as if, okay, it's not if you're winning, it's how much are you winning by, how well are you playing, how many mistakes are there. It's almost like you're graded on the extent of a blowout versus just winning a game. Whereas for most programs, even in the Power Five, it's, are you winning? Are you into that next week 1-0? And here it is just, how much are you winning by? How well is each individual player playing? The slightest mistake could open up controversy for a position battle. Just the very nuances of every different position group is highlighted, just because there's so much talent lined top to bottom on this roster that there's always a conversation if maybe the guy beneath you is better because he's also a 5-star or he's a highly rated 4-star. And I think in a lot of programs, there isn't necessarily that back and forth throughout the season. There's training camp battles, right? There's preseason battles, there's injuries, guys have to step up, but there probably isn't the same level of competition at positions throughout the season just because of one mistake made or two mistakes made in a game. So I think that I knew going in was going to be something that was different, but you can't even really prepare for it because just the level of fan interest and passion is extremely cool, but it also invites a lot of these conversations that you just don't see in other parts of the country.
I agree with you 100%. And sometimes I wonder if that's fair or not. And, I in this age, I believe the W is all that matters. And if you can get it by a few more points, that's good too. But you're exactly right. It's both an athletic contest and a beauty contest every week for Ohio State. And I don't think that's fair on the coaches, et cetera. I'm not giving them any excuses. They get paid really good money. But boy, when the what comes down, it comes down, man, like hail. Frozen, what? You know what I mean? Because it hurts when it hits, and then it smells as it lingers. But and I'm not sure the media, if we're just basically delivering information in some form or fashion, and obviously delivering opinions on the way things go. But I just wanted to ask you, what were you most at the end of the year? What were you most disappointed in at the end of the regular season? Besides the fact they got beat by Michigan, what were you most disappointed in about this football team?
Well, this one's a little bit selfish because, when I was coming in, I heard the greatest things about CJ Stroud, and I had watched CJ Stroud do amazing things on the football field, but pretty much as soon as I got onto the beat, maybe on the bad luck, but he did not play great football. I think every game that I covered, he was under 70% completion percentage, which sounds fine, relatively, but given his prowess and his success at Ohio State, he was above that mark. And, just at times looked off, especially with the medium to deep range passes. And, some of that was conditions. We saw at Northwestern, really no one could throw the football in that weather. But other times, it just either drops were happening in the Michigan game, or he just wasn't putting the ball where he needed to. And I think it's really cool for him because, he obviously gets to be a Heisman finalist for the second time. We saw the ceremony on Friday. I think we'll talk a little bit about that and just how cool that was for him. But he gets a shot to go out the right way. I think game, it was very apparent that that was probably his last game as an Ohio State Buckeye. And now, he's going into the college football playoff. He talked about how juiced he is for that matchup because it's a chance for him to cement his legacy at Ohio State and not be remembered as a guy who couldn't beat Michigan or as a guy who didn't deliver a Big Ten championship, but a guy that got them to the college football playoff. And if he pulls off the upset against Georgia, that's going to be one of the better wins in program history. And so for me personally, I think it's cool to watch CJ. He carries himself with so much class.
Yeah.
Obviously a man of faith, and a lot of respect for him and what he does. And I think it'd just be cool to see him do what he's capable of doing. And I think he is one of the best quarterbacks in college football. I think he'll be a good pro. And, I guess that's one thing that I was looking forward to seeing and just haven't seen quite yet, but we'll have an opportunity to see in the college football playoff.
Yeah, it's interesting. I voted for the Heisman Trophy for the 39th straight year this year. And my ballot, I had CJ at the top, Caleb Williams second, and Max Duggan, no matter how you pronounce it. Don't call him late for the 4th and goal, which is exactly what TCU did in that overtime game. But the bottom line is that was my top three. And people will say to me, I'm sure, well, wait a minute, CJ never beat Michigan. He as a starting quarterback. He never won a Big Ten championship as a starting quarterback. And I go, well, Caleb Williams never beat Utah as a starting quarterback. He didn't win a Pac-12 championship. So, talk to me later about, it's a cumulative effect. I mean, I know you were watching this game before. The fourth quarter, especially at Penn State, was one of the great quarters by an Ohio State quarterback, maybe the best in history. So was the second half against Utah in the Rose Bowl, which, by the way, happened after last year's Heisman Trophy was delivered. I mean, that's one of the great performances by a quarterback, period, in college football. I didn't forget about all of those, and I agree with you. Things fell off basically in the month of November, right after you arrived and unloaded your Volkswagen Beetle with all that stuff jammed in it. Things fell off for Ohio State. The Ohio State offense didn't help, as you well know, because you got to go to the Win Bowl, otherwise known as the game at Northwestern. Nobody could throw in that stuff. But I just think as a career over 2 years, CJ's been about as good as anybody I've ever seen at Ohio State from the standpoint of consistently throwing the ball. And even the Michigan game, he threw for over 300 yards, had a couple of passes dropped in that game, which would have made either dropped or knocked out of people's hands that probably should have been caught. That would have made a huge difference in that game. And that's what I always say about the quarterback, man. It takes two to tango. And yeah, he missed some throws in that game also, as anybody's want to do. But you're right. Is it fair? I think it is fair. Could be one of his last 2 games as a Buckeye. Because like you said, he probably wasn't going to play in a bowl game, but in a college football playoff game, he's ready to go. Is it fair to base someone's legacy on one game or one season or a couple of games? And my answer is, well, of course it is, because that's what sets you apart. What do you do in those games where it really matters, But like I said, with a quarterback, it takes 2 to tango. And so you always judge it that way too, right?
Absolutely. I mean, the bottom line is, like, if he doesn't perform extremely well against Georgia, or even if he does and they lose, you can't say, oh, he was not a great quarterback for Ohio State. I mean, he's still up there with JT Barrett, some of the best stats you'll have in that program record book. Of course, JT was there even longer. And I think you just can't discount that, even though at that point you'd be saying he didn't beat Michigan, he didn't win the big games. I think the level of consistency, 3 games with 6 touchdown passes, which is a program high for a single game. Just some of the throws, the touch, and the anticipation he passes with. It's clear why he's a top 5 projected NFL draft pick. I mean, he's going to be a guy that's going to get great opportunities at the next level in the NFL. And I think there's a reason why. So whether you want to claim that now, while he's playing for Ohio State, or you want to claim it when he's successful at the NFL level, if he is, that's your choice. I think that, but there's always going to be that pressure. And I think that's fair to hold them to that standard, right? Because it is a big game. And the 2014 team is known for what it is because of the way it performed in that playoff. And Cardale Jones, he didn't have the numbers that CJ had. He didn't have the numbers that a lot of guys had, but he won those games in the college football playoff and led them to a national championship, and he'll always be loved in Columbus. So
Yeah.
I think that those games, they matter and they carry weight, and they should be.
Yeah. And Cardale Jones, when you look back on it, he did what it took to win the game, whether it was running or throwing. And that's what stood out. Max Duggan this year lifted TCU. He did whatever it took, whether it was running or throwing. And I got into that with Urban Meyer on Urban's Take last week. I mean, how do you take a guy that basically willed you back into that game against Kansas State in the last 2 carries of the game? He doesn't carry the ball. You hand it to a running back, you get stuffed. For some reason, you go for it on 4th. I mean, just right on down the line. But what was interesting to me is I'm looking at that those top 4 for the Heisman standing there the other night. The only guy who won his last game of those 4 was Stetson Bennett, former walk-on dude who continually got slapped down, proved his worth, won a national championship, and is back playing for another one. And that's who C.J. Stroud's going to face. And what Stetson Bennett does is if it takes a run on 3rd and 4 to keep a drive alive, or 3rd and 8, he does it. He also he's a little bit hit or miss in the passing game. Sometimes he's hot, sometimes he's not. But when he's hot, he's really hot. And I just think this is definitely, in the modern college football era, your quarterback decides the game for you. I think you, in some form or fashion. That's why I'm very much looking forward to this Peach Bowl, aren't you?
Absolutely. I mean, we talk about the defense in the Michigan game, but if you're scoring points, you could still win that game. And this is something that I know you've brought up, Tim. Their 3 losses in the last 2 years, it's been they've scored less than 30 points. And I think with this Ohio State offense, it's been near the top of the FBS really throughout the entire Ryan Day era. Scoring points, which starts with your quarterback, is paramount, especially in the playoff, where the offenses are, quite frankly, just better than the defenses. So you're going to have to probably win some sort of shootout, if you want to call it that. And it's going to be CJ Stroud v. Stetson Bennett, a 25-year-old former walk-on, went to JUCO. And I think it's really funny. Everyone was shocked that he's 25. It seemed like most people didn't understand that, but I was like, his story. He started on Georgia, didn't have a scholarship, then went to JUCO, then came back, got the scholarship. And it's like, it adds up.
Yeah.
But very different circumstances. And I know CJ was lowly recruited until, his recruiting took off in that 2020 cycle, but certainly different storylines of the top.
Yeah. It would have been interesting if Stetson Bennett and Hendon Hooker were two of the finalists. One's 24, the other's 25. I mean, it's an old man's game again, but hey, that means I got a shot. Andy. Hey, we're going to come back and talk a little bit more about Ohio State getting ready for this bowl game. But I want to get to my conversation with Gary Stokan, the executive director, longtime executive director of the Peach Bowl, the guy who started out as a basketball player at North Carolina State and then a basketball coach. And we kind of chronicle how he got into this position. And he's one of the power brokers in major college football now, the way he has grown the Peach Bowl, obviously with great help from a big-time sponsor in Chick-fil-A. That's what it always takes, and a great venue in that Mercedes-Benz Dome. Formerly, before that, they played at Atlanta Fulton County Stadium, and then they played at the Georgia Dome, and now, of course, they graduated to the Mercedes-Benz Dome, home of the Atlanta Falcons, but also home of some great college football, including a preseason. Well, it's not a preseason game; it's part of the special game every year, like Georgia versus Oregon. This year was played in that game. And then, of course, they've hosted the Southeastern Conference Championship game. It seems like forever now. But let's get to my conversation with Gary Stokan, Executive Director of the Peach Bowl. Boy, I'm pleased to welcome this next young man, Gary Stokan. Hey, Gary, welcome to the Tim May Podcast, a longtime Executive Director of the Peach Bowl. You got to be stoked, don't you? Getting Ohio State finally in your game?
I appreciate the comment that I'm young.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that. Yeah, we're ecstatic to have number 1 versus number 4. This is the 3rd time we've hosted the CFP semifinal, and every time we've had number 1 versus 4. So to have Ohio State for the first time is tremendous. and to have Georgia back as number one. They started the season as number one in our Chick-fil-A kickoff game. So we said this was going to be a record season, and to open with Atlanta with Georgia and Oregon and Clemson and Georgia Tech, and then to end it with number 1 versus 4 Ohio State Georgia is tremendous.
Yeah, just think about the impact all those games had. I mean, it's
it's close to $100 million of economic impact. Number one, it's great for the city tourism wise because coming out of COVID. And then number two, these Chick-fil-A kickoff games, we've changed the face of college football on the front side of the season because you can see Notre Dame going to Ohio State or Oregon going to Ohio State in your case. But it's become a major data point for the CFP selection committee. And it's also really helped TV ratings and people really get into football the first week of the season. Those first Ohio State, Notre Dame, LSU, Florida State, our 2 games through week 10 were 4 of the top 20 broadcasts on TV, believe it or not.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about the impact it had. Forget about financial impact on the Atlanta area. I mean, the impact it had just on this year's college football playoffs is kind of ridiculous when you look at it. Hey, Gary, I want to get to you real quick. Most people don't understand the Peach Bowl has been around since 1968, I think, right?
That's correct.
And you've been the
oldest bowl game.
Yeah, and you've been the executive director since what, 1998, if I'm not mistaken, right?
That's correct.
I wanted to get you real quick because I don't have a lot of time with you. I wanted to just get your little timeline there on. Obviously, you weren't in the bowl, for want of another term, rep business way back when. Matter of fact, you were in the basketball shoe business for a while, weren't you?
Yeah, I started my career as an assistant basketball coach at North Carolina State after playing at NC State, and then went from there to Adidas, and then from Adidas to Converse, then started my own sports marketing company, sold that to a company from London. In 96, they wanted to come in for the Olympic Games we were having here. Went back to Adidas when we signed Kobe Bryant. And, then in 1998, got off the road and took this job.
Yeah. But I was going to say, you were on the cutting edge way back then of like leading up to what we have right now, which is the name, image, and likeness. You know what I mean? I mean, in some form or fashion about getting big time basketball players in the NBA signed to shoe contracts. I mean, that was cutting edge back then, right?
Well, yeah, I had signed Herschel Walker, who arguably is the best college football player ever. I signed Mike Krzyzewski, the best college basketball coach ever. And I had Michael Jordan ready to sign, and Adidas just didn't give me the money.
Yeah.
And so he signed with Nike, and we all know the rest of that story. So I'd have had the best basketball player ever, the best basketball coach ever, and the best college football player ever. And then I signed extension contracts with Magic and Bird. Yeah, I've dealt with a lot of athletes and a lot of coaches and been very fortunate to be in sports for my whole career of 44 years.
Yeah. But how did you go? I mean, how did you go from, obviously sports marketing is what led you to where you are now, but how did you go from being a stud basketball player to getting so involved in football? I mean, was it just a natural progression?
Well, number one, I wasn't a stud basketball player. I
threw that in there.
I picked splinters out of my butt.
Yeah.
Number two, sports to me was always interesting. My dad was the ticket sales manager at the Civic Arena in Pittsburgh. That's where I grew up. And so I was always around sports. I'd go down early with him and be around it. And then, just really passionate about sports. I found my passion early. And so I've never worked a day in my life. And hopefully I've been successful at it, but it's been something that's been very, very good to me, and the people in sports and the relationships you can build are tremendous. They're lifelong. And so I've been very, very blessed.
Well, what intrigued you? I'm just giving some background here because I want to lead up to my point is you guys being part of the basically the New Year's Six, the college football playoff six. But what intrigued you about getting involved with the Peach Bowl in particular? Obviously in 96, between 96 and 98, you made that transition, but what was it that intrigued you about it?
Well, I'd always served as a volunteer when I worked for Adidas and Converse and owned my sports marketing company as a volunteer for the Peach Bowl because I'd helped the executive director at that time, Robert Del Morgan, get his job. And so we were friends. So, you know, we worked together. He was from Pennsylvania. I was from Pennsylvania. And then the opportunity came in 98 to run the Atlanta Sports Council and the Peach Bowl. And so the Sports Council gave me the opportunity to work every sport. I mean, I recruited the NCAA Final Four men's and women's here, Super Bowls, WrestleMania, figure skating. You know, it just gave me a broad opportunity in all sports. And I found that even though I love basketball, and matter of fact, I just sent to Dan Gavitt an email saying that I think basketball needs to do what we did in football and start the season in November 1st and have an all-in 350 team basketball tournament through December, and then play the conference schedule January through March 15th, and then March 15th have the NCAA. It would have a flow to it. But anyway, I love ideas. I love to be creative. I love a challenge. And, you know, the Atlanta Sports Council gave me all the sports. And then Peach Bowl gave me the focus on football. Although, you know, at the Peach Bowl, we created a doubleheader basketball tournament for both men and women back at the time. So, yeah, I've always loved basketball and stayed close to it. And I miss coaching every day, and tell my friends like, well, now they're getting out of it, but Roy Williams and Rick Barnes, who were colleagues and friends when I got started, to coach a little bit harder every day for me, because I miss it every day.
Yeah, I bet you do. Nothing replaces it. I do a little podcast, been doing a little podcast during the football season this year with Urban Meyer. Now, you know, everybody knows his story, et cetera. But once you're that involved in it, man, of course you miss especially the game day, I would think, is like.
Well, it's all consuming. You know,
yes.
When you're coaching, it's all consuming. You're in a bubble, and it's the greatest challenge. And all I've done is I've taken all that I've learned, you know, in coaching and just applied it to basketball. So our internal business philosophy is teamwork, empowerment, accountability, management. You recruit people to roles. You let them understand the role, have them accept the role, and then you let them play the role. You empower them to play the role. Just like, and I tell my team, you know, this is, hey, I'm not putting a point guard at center, and I'm not putting a center at forward. I'm not putting a quarterback at tight end, and I'm not putting a tight end at guard. You have a specific role, whether it's marketing, events, legal, and I'm putting you in that role because you're an expert in the role, and I'm going to let you play the role. So that's the way we work.
Sweet. Like a head coach should.
Yeah.
Bobby Bowden,
Exactly.
Bear Bryant up on his tower. You got a tower there in your office?
No, we got a goalpost though.
There you go. There you go. Now you're talking my language. Hey, let's get back to this. 98, you take over the Peach Bowl. Nice bowl game, you know. But I would, you know, back then, I'm trying to think, you know, because I've been around for a long time. Since I'm 68. I mean, I've been watching bowl games since 1960, 61, whatever. You know what I'm talking about. But
I'm 67, and in 1998, when I took the bowl over, I was in charge of the selection committee and took Georgia and Virginia. So the AJC, I don't know if you know Mark Bradley of the AJC, but he came out and said, Georgia heading toward third tier bowl game, the Peach Bowl.
That's what I was going to ask you. Yeah.
And, you know, so that's the way we were profiled back then. And so for us to come from then in 98 to 2022 to be hosting number 1 versus number 4 for the third time in the CFP semifinals, and to host the national championship in 17, and then to host it again in 25, you know, it's pretty remarkable. So we've come a long way, but it's been great support from the city of Atlanta, corporate people, the board, our volunteers, our staff, stakeholders, partners, the stadium, hotels. We've got some great partners here in Atlanta, and that's why you can put on an Olympics, and you can put on Super Bowls and Final Fours, et cetera. We've been very blessed to have that kind of team mentality in the city of Atlanta.
But I wanted to ask you this, though. When was that moment? Do you remember with your board of directors or whatever, where y'all decided, hey, we're going for the brass ring here? I remember, you know, a lot of people have a lot of opinions about John Junker and the Fiesta, but they decided they did. they wanted to be part of the big show. You know, I mean, when I was growing up, it was a Cotton Bowl, Orange Bowl, Sugar Bowl, Rose Bowl. And, you know, everybody else was like tiered from there. When do you remember when was there a moment or a year where y'all just kicked back and said,
Yeah.
hey, we're going to go for it?
Yeah, I'm a competitive son of a gun.
Yeah, I can tell that.
In 2006, when the BCS, matter of fact, in 98, I'll tell you two stories. One in 98, when the BCS came out, I came out and Rudy Martzke was with USA Today, and Rudy was a friend. And I said, you know, this is going to hurt the bowl system because all the media and all the attention is going to flock to the 4 bowls. And Roy Kramer, that December, I took the job September. That December, he ripped me a new one saying, what do you mean it's going to hurt? I said, well, you wait and see what happens. And I was right.
Yeah.
It hurt the rest of the bowl system. And then in 2006, when the BCS said, we're going to start a championship game, we're going to add another bowl, we made a great bid. We didn't win because Paul Houlihan of the Cotton Bowl or the Sugar Bowl just passed away.
Yeah.
Went to the commissioners and said, look, let the 4 of us, the Sugar, Orange, Fiesta, and Rose, run our game, and then 2 weeks later host the championship on a rotational basis, which they did. They agreed to that.
Yeah.
So in 2007, the NCAA put a 12th game on the conference on the football schedule. They added another game to the schedule. And I said to my board, I said, look, if they're not going to let us in the backside of the season, we're going to start the BCS on the front side of the season. And so I called Terry Don Phillips of Clemson, who was a friend. They were going to be a top 10 team with CJ Spiller and that group. And then I called Nick Saban, who was a friend, who was in his second year at Alabama.
Yeah.
It just finished 7-6, lost to Louisiana Monroe. And I said, Nick, I'm starting this. And he said, Gary, he said, love the play over there. You've been good to me because I helped him get in the Peach Bowl in 2000 when he was just starting at LSU.
That's right.
And wound up coming over, and they were like borderline 25th. And Clemson was number 9. They beat Clemson 34-10. And if Nick were on this call, he'd tell you that was the start of the Alabama run.
Yeah.
Because the next year I had them back in our Chick-fil-A kickoff game. They were ranked number 5 against Frank Beamer and Virginia Tech, who was ranked number 7. And Nick told me, he said, if I want to come over and play, because if I can win Alabama recruiting and finish second to Georgia for Georgia kids, I'll play for national championships. And that second year, his third year, the second year I had him in our Chick-fil-A kickoff game in 2009, he came in, beat Virginia Tech, went on to win the national championship, and had 19 kids from Georgia on his roster.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I got basically Atlanta back in the mix by creating this kickoff game, which has changed the face of college football scheduling. And then in parallel to that, I was working to bring the College Football Hall of Fame to Atlanta because I had been to their induction ceremony in South Bend and said, boy, this is old and antiquated. If this were in Atlanta, it'd be tremendous. So I had worked for probably about 8 years in getting that thing done. And we brought it. So I signed the 30-year license with the NFF in 2009. We opened in 2011. And I think those two things really helped elevate us in the eyes of college football people that, hey, because we had put in $13 million into the College Football Hall of Fame. So, you know, that type of commitment, the commitment to change the face of college football on the front side with the kickoff games. And then we had sold out, I think, 18 of 19 bowl games at the time with SEC versus ACC. So I had worked my ass off building a lot of relationships, and we went on to get the opportunity in 2015 to host the first CFP game. Yeah.
I mean, but that's crazy. And I mean, did you have that vision that you were going to be? I'm asking 3 questions.
I told him I wanted to be
crazy how it worked out, I guess. Go ahead.
Yeah, I told my board, I said, you know, my job is to get us into the BCS, and I failed because we never got into BCS, but we did get in the CFP, and we've changed the face of college football with the Hall of Fame and with the kickoff games. And so, for a basketball guy, I guess I don't look at myself that way, but I guess for a basketball guy, that's not bad. Football guys always tell me, well, you don't know whether the ball is stuffed or
Puffed.
there's air in it. So
yeah,
I always laugh at them.
yeah. That's pretty funny because that's what I was leading to. This is looking more and more like a basketball tournament every day. You look around, 12 teams starting in 2024 are going to be part of this. What is your opinion of where this is headed? I mean, I would think you're for it, but go ahead.
Yeah, I think a couple things. I think there's some unintended consequences to the playoff that are going to come into play. You know, they've started already. The media will pick up on it, obviously, when you have conference champions. Like if we had the playoff this year, Clemson, would get a bye and is ranked number 7. Ohio State, number 4, would have to play in the first week. That's something that the media will probably, have some fun with, I guess.
Yes.
But I think the thing that concerns me the most, and I think there's a lot of great things: participation by student athletes, more teams, more networks involved will promote the game. And I think ESPN does a great job right now. We're the second most favorite sport in this country. And so the growth opportunity is huge in college football. So everybody will benefit from that. But I think you got to be concerned about kids who are hurt at the end of the year, which everybody is in college football, and asking them to play a conference championship game and then play Ohio State and then Alabama and then Georgia, the 3 best teams they've played all year.
Yep.
Week to week to week, after they've just been handed a number 1 draft card by the NFL that guarantees them a $20 million signing bonus.
Yeah.
I think that's a real concern on my part. May not be on a lot of other people, but on my part, I think it's a concern because you have agents now in the kids' ears, and the parents are going to talk to the kids. And, we have to find a way with the NFL. There has to be a better relationship with the NFL through college football. My belief is that, if we're going to keep it under the NCAA, which I don't think it should be, but if we're going to keep it under the NCAA, then the new NCAA president should be a business person, not an academician. Number 2, they should have a commissioner of college football, college basketball, baseball, and Olympic sports and women's basketball. And that commissioner should have a board that's comprised of 2 ADs, 2 commissioners, 2 student athletes, 2 coaches, and they should figure out for that sport what is the best vision for that sport going forward.
Yeah.
Dealing with scheduling, the playoff, transfer portal, NIL, all the things that signing date, that you have to deal with, because there's no leadership right now. And this is not to denigrate the presidents, but they don't have enough time for sports. They don't understand sports, but yet they're the leaders of sports. Yeah. And I think that's some of the reasons we have some of the problems we're dealing with right now, and some of the consternation that everybody's dealing with right now.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I'll let you go from now, but it's funny you brought that up about the grind that college football players are going to be facing in a couple of years. I mean, if you're in that round of the first round, you could end up playing 4 games. And I've been opining that there may be guys, because everybody's got an agent in their ear now. It's illegal, right? Who are being whispered, hey, dude, these are going to be the 4 most intense games you've ever played in your life. And you're going top 5 in the draft, top 12 in the draft. I could see opt-outs coming from that, as opposed to like playing in a, quote, meaningless bowl game. But it's funny you brought that up. That's what I've been thinking all along, Gary. Hey, last question before I go. There's one thing Ohio State fans who've never been to Atlanta for a bowl game, what should they take in if they get a shot?
Most definitely they should go to the College Football Hall of Fame. Ohio State is staying at the Omni, which the College Football Hall of Fame is right next to the Omni. CNN Center's right there.
Yeah.
The Centennial Olympic Park is right across the street. The aquarium is within 100 yards. The largest aquarium in the world. The Civil and Human Rights Center, the World of Coke, those are all within 200 to 300 yards of the Omni. And so they should take all of those in. and then they can walk up to Mercedes-Benz Stadium. It's basically maybe 2 or 3 football fields walk.
Yeah.
And then it's also 200-300 yards to our Fan Fest, which we'll have about 35,000 people at our Fan Fest in Georgia World Congress Center. Wow. With all kind of activities. And then we'll have our parade that will go right up by the Omni into the Georgia World Congress Center that day. And then we'll have our team walks about 2 hours before the game that in the Home Depot backyard, the teams will get out of their buses and walk through their fans into Mercedes-Benz Stadium with a kickoff at 8 o'clock in prime time. So, cool. And Atlanta's a great time that time of year. You know, we have huge Ohio State alumni base down here.
Yeah.
There's a ton of them in the Southeast. So, you know, people keep telling me, well, Georgia's going to be everywhere. I said, well, you've never seen Ohio State go to a bowl game like I have over the last 25 years. They flock everywhere. So there will be a lot of red with Ohio State and Georgia in the city of Atlanta on New Year's Eve and a couple of days before, I'm sure.
Yeah, crazy. These teams have only played once before in the history of football. And I was there, Garrison-Hurst versus Robert Smith. You know, the Citrus Bowl way back when. But that was the Citrus Bowl, and it's funny. The Citrus Bowl, I think, had aspirations to be what the Peach Bowl has become. Isn't that funny, Gary?
Well, it's interesting. Steve Hogan and his team do a great job, and Tom Mickle before him. We've just been very blessed to have the city support. They do as well. We've probably got the better stadium, and they've done a lot of great things with their stadium as well.
Yeah.
But, you know, Atlanta's the 4th largest convention town in the United States behind Orlando, Las Vegas, and Chicago. And 4 of the 6 largest conventions in Atlanta this year are college football games. Wow. Our 2 Chick-fil-A kickoff games, our Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl, and the SEC Championship. So that's how important college football is to Atlanta. And I'm telling you, it's, you know, growing up in Pittsburgh, it was more of a, you know, and I grew up in the Marino and Dorset era where Pitt won a national championship. But I'm telling you, college football down here, because they didn't have pro sports till 1966.
Yeah.
Colleges, you know, that's why the SEC and ACC, I mean, those were the pro sports, were the college teams. And it's remained that way till this day.
Yeah. I grew up in Alabama and Texas, man. I saw every Alabama home game. 61 to 64. As I say, I saw Joe Namath when he played on Two Good Knees. I said that before HBO did. But yeah, it was amazing. Just the Atlanta Braves, you know, whatever, whoever saw that come. My favorite team was the St. Louis Cardinals, you know what I mean? But I know what you're saying.
My father-in-law played for the Cardinals back, 52, 53, somewhere around there. But yeah, Joe Willie Namath from Pittsburgh. I remember seeing Joe Willie in the New York Jets when Lou Holtz, who was a friend, coached at NC State, left state, went to the Jets.
Yeah. And
so he got me a credential and had me down in the locker room. And, you know, Joe Namath to me was like the best, right? When I grew up, he was, And
just think how big he'd have been on Twitter.
And NIL, what he'd have been in NIL, right?
Yeah.
But anyway, I went over his locker to talk to him, and I couldn't believe both his knees were ballooned up. You know, he was hunched over. I mean, he was a shell of himself at that time, player-wise.
Yeah.
Because he was at the end of his career. But I was amazed to look at him and say, "Gosh, this is Joe Willie Namath."
Oh yeah, he was bigger than life.
He took a beating.
Yeah, exactly. Boy, we could talk about that for another hour, but I know you got to go. Hey, Gary Stokan, man, executive director of the Peach Bowl. Thanks for joining me, my man. I mean, I've always been impressed. I've been impressed watching you from afar bring this bowl to where it is now. You know, and now it's part of the big ball. You know what I mean, so to speak. And you got to be kind of proud of it, right?
Well, I'm humbly proud. I do it because. You know, a lot of people have had a hand in it. No one does anything by themselves. And so we've created a team that's really worked well together, and we've created something special. And I'm glad because the city of Atlanta is my adopted city now. And very proud to leave something behind that, you know, I think is meaningful for the city and gives us a lot of good things. I think the thing I'm most proud about, though, is we're the most charitable bowl organization in the country. You said we were formed in 1968 by the Lions to give back, and we've maintained that mission. we've given $60 million in charitable donations since 2002,
Wow.
which is probably double what every other bowl has done.
Wow.
And, that's most important thing to us, I think, using college football to help impact other people positively.
There you go. Ladies and gentlemen, Gary Stokan, Executive Director of the Peach Bowl. Thanks for joining the Tim May podcast, Gary.
Thanks, Tim. Hope to see you in December.
Absolutely, my man. See
All
you
right,
then.
take care. Thank you.
Thank you, man. That was great. Here's what you can just do. You can just come back and maybe comment on, like, it takes guys, like this with a little bit of vision, but also some oomph, you know what I mean? To, like, that's why we're headed to a 12-team playoff and stuff, because, soon as you went to the BCS, well, that was just 1 versus 2, but when you went to a Final Four, it literally did diminish the value of what I call the high to medium tier bowl games. I mean, Eastern Michigan playing somebody else in like the Reliant, car rental bowl or something is going to stay special for those teams. You understand what I'm saying? What it diminished was those next tier of games after the big boys. So here we go. We're going to be coming back in 3, 2, and 1. I appreciate Gary Stokan taking that time with me. As usual in a conversation with yours truly, Tim May. Sometimes it goes overtime, and there was a case with that. But I like talking to these guys, Andy, who are sort of the movers and shakers. Sometimes in front of the scenes and sometimes behind the scenes, right? But they're the ones who are driving the bus, really, when it comes to major college football right now, especially the postseason, right?
The ability to get the Peach Bowl to where it is now, where it is this fixture in the college football playoff certain years, and to be a game that's really recognized among the New Year's Six, I think is a great accomplishment. And so much work goes into bowl preparation. It's not a 1-month process. This is a 365 days a year process where you're getting ready for it. You're working with sponsors. You're getting the team set up. I mean, the invitation process extends throughout the year. If you're part of the college football playoff, you're working with the committee. It's a whole event. It's not as so simple as, it happens through December to January. That's what you see. What you don't see is all the behind the scenes stuff. And a lot of that Gary has to do, and it's quite incredible.
Hey, real quick, I have gotten your opinion on, because you've never been on the Tim May podcast, but do you like the move? Because, Gary brought up near the end of that conversation something I've been saying all along. And the concern is when you go to a 12-team playoff here in a couple of years, 2024, it's almost right on top of us. Now that the Rose Bowl is signed on, you could play, and you could play literally, if you're in that first round of games, which only 4 teams won't be, you could play 4 games in a span of about 6 weeks that will determine the national championship. Plus, you might have played in your own conference's championship game, which would be 5 games at almost the highest level from an intensity standpoint, a ferocity standpoint, a physical standpoint that you can play in college football. And, I said this on the radio a couple of times with Bo Bishop, I could see guys opting out instead of running that gauntlet. It's just like you got guys opting out right now and not putting themselves in jeopardy for one, quote, meaningless, end quote, bowl game. I could see guys going, well, you know what, man, I'm beat up. I'm 2 games into this thing. Hey, good luck, fellas. I got the NFL draft to worry about. But I don't think people understand what a grind that could be for aspirants to the national championship. Yes, only 2 teams would possibly play 4 games or 3 games, but that's still 3 games at the highest level. I mean, what's your thought on that?
I think.
Wait a minute, and remember, ladies and gentlemen, you're not working with a waiver wire. You can't, even though there's a transfer portal, you can't bring guys in the middle of December and then play for you. At least not yet. That might be the next shoe that drops. But there's no waiver wire like there is in the NFL. Yeah, NFL rosters are smaller, but they can go get somebody who's cleaning streets somewhere if they want to. So go ahead.
I totally agree with you with the injury concerns. I think if you're going to do this, you're going to need to start looking hard at the mirror and say, maybe we need to cut down the regular season a game or something, because you're running the risk of injury, opt-outs, just decreasing the quality of the game. One thing I will say, coming from a beat where you cover a team in which they're not going to realistically have a chance at the college football playoff as it currently stands, because everyone that I've come across at Ohio State doesn't necessarily agree with the expanded playoff. And that makes sense to me. Ohio State is good enough to make the playoff as is. They have consistently made the playoff. I mean, this is the 5th appearance now. And it's one of those things where I get that,
Yeah.
this team's good enough recruiting wise. Coming from covering a team that isn't good enough and that could potentially, if they have a good year, a one-off year where they make a run, could make that 12 team. I think it makes sense. I know coaches in that building wanted it. I know coaches throughout the conference that didn't have the standing to Ohio State or Georgia or LSU or any of these SEC schools has. They wanted it because it actually gives you a chance to recruit with some genuine, pursuit of these athletes and telling them, hey, we can contend for a championship, and you're not lying to them. A lot of recruiting is kind of being the salesman, maybe even a snake oil salesman, lying a little bit. And I think with this expanded playoff, you actually can sell to guys, we can actually get there. Like that's not just a fantasy, like this is something we could actually accomplish. And so I think in that regard, I think it's actually a positive. But I do believe the injury risk is certainly something that needs to be considered. I don't know if that's, I've heard the possibility of cutting that FCS game and playing that as a spring game and bringing in the revenue that way for both of those programs. I don't know how likely that is, to be honest. It's all about money. That's why the NBA plays 82 games, the MLB plays 162, and the NFL keeps expanding its season. But yeah, as you said, there's no waiver wire like the NFL. You can't just pick up guys to replenish roster holes. And we already see so many opt-outs as is right now. And it would be really interesting, to value, what's the importance of playing that one extra college football playoff game? If you are that good and you are going to play in the NFL, is that worth risking it? We saw last year, Matt Corral, he wasn't even playing the college football playoff. He gets hurt in his bowl game, goes to Carolina, gets hurt again, out for his whole rookie season. I mean, you can't blame him for wanting to play, but it's just another one of those examples where you also can't blame the guys for opting out because the injury risk is just so high. And I know NIL kind of maybe counteracts that, right? Because you are making money, but it's not the same money. And we'd be fooling ourselves right now to say that it's the same money as the NFL money.
Yeah, but let's throw this out there, though, because this is what I've talked about with some of my colleagues before. Hey, you go to a 12-team playoff, players should be getting financial bonuses to play in those games, and incrementally, probably more the farther along you go. And it's not going to at all for a guy of big time caliber, first, second round draft pick caliber. It's not going to put any shade at all on what you can make as a high NFL draft pick. But I think, paying players individually $50,000 to play in the national championship game, to play in it. You know what I mean? In other words, if you make it, you're making $50,000, not winners, make this much and that much. And you incrementally go from like 10 to maybe 25 to 50, depending on how it goes along. I don't think that's out of the realm of reasoning and out of the realm of possibility. And because here's the thing, most of the guys that we see play major college football don't end up playing in the NFL. But the guys you pay attention to, the guys who bring eyeballs to TV sets and who bring fannies to seats, they end up at least having a shot in the NFL. And so there's got to be some kind of in between ground there where these guys, I think it's been talked about, but a little bonus system for guys who actually make the playoff, because coaches get bonuses for making the playoffs, and they're just calling plays. And then watching a quarterback break that play off and make the play on his own, and suddenly the coach is a genius, right? But you see where I'm going. Do you agree with that idea?
I think it should be considered. I mean, the other thing we have to think about is that student athletes already live a life that is completely different from regular students. And you're talking about a time, the peak holiday season, where most students are back home with families. and you're taking them away from that experience. And I know that's kind of how it already is with the bowl season and the current college football playoff. But we're talking about even an extended playoff where that's going to be even maximized more. Sometimes the bowl practices for teams that aren't in the college football playoff are more of a glorified time for the younger guys to get an opportunity to get that extra time with coaches. It's not, a super intense atmosphere per se. It's more of a celebration of the season, getting one last look at the guys you have for next year, or the guys that are going out. And so obviously it's different in the college football playoff. It's all you have, it's all intensity, and you're adding 8 teams to that. So that's, like over 800 more players to that situation. And that's more guys that are missing time with families. That's more guys that are missing times with just loved ones and friends from home. I think there needs to be more of an incentive for players to want to go through that, to put their bodies through that. And especially when there is the potential to play at the next level, or even just to preserve their bodies for a career after football. I think, just being realistic, there needs to be something to keep them going.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Last thing, speaking of that, dovetailing. I do that a lot here in the Tim A podcast. Who's the guy that at the end of the year was banged up for Ohio State that needs to be close to 100% if, in fact, they can get him to that point? Because obviously several guys were super banged up at the end of after the Michigan game. Who's a guy that you got your eye on in this pre-playoff practices that maybe they need to take the intensity off, but he's definitely you can see him playing a huge role if Ohio State, in fact, has a shot at beating Georgia and moving on.
I want to say Travion Henderson. I don't see how that's possible at this point, given injury history this year. I mean, Ryan Day says that they should have everyone healthy, but I just don't see how Trey makes it to that point, given what he's been dealing with, which is admirable. He's been trying to play in the first place. I would say Mayan Williams then, because I think you need to have a guy in that backfield that's consistently producing to give that passing game more of a shot. If Georgia makes him one-dimensional, as much as those Georgia defensive backs struggled against LSU, I'd put CJ Stroud up against anyone, but it's hard to play one-dimensional football. And you saw that in the second half against Michigan. They had to throw. They were down, and it didn't work out too well. And I think you got to have some balance going to that game. You don't want to get in a position where you're down 2-3 scores to a Georgia team that has played with a lead most of this season. I mean, that's where they're comfortable. You want to have an ability to control the clock a little bit and to have some balance offensively. And I think, not only is that start with O-line play, but it also involves good running back play. And we've saw at times this year, there's been holes open up for running backs for Ohio State, and they haven't always had the vision to hit them. I think Maya Williams has been the best of the group in that regard to be able to do that. Now, that's partly because he's been healthier relatively than Trey, but I think he's someone that would need to step up in that role and someone that would be crucial for a playoff run.
All right. Well, dude, we're within what? I get my weeks all get mixed up on me, but I think we're 2.5 weeks away, right?
We're 19 days away.
Yeah, as we record this. It'll be 18 when people listen to it, and 17 when people listen to it again, and 15 when they go, you know what? I'm getting last minute shopping here. We're driving around. Let's listen to the Tim May podcast featuring Andy Backstrom. Hey, Andy, I appreciate you joining me, my man. We'll do this some more if you don't mind. I like picking your brain, so to speak, even though you are still a quote youngster, but hey, man, and do you miss Boston, or do you miss the Boston area?
Yeah, I do a bit. I think there's certain things about it. The people are a little bit ruder.
Yeah.
Sports fans.
Hey, my in-laws live over there, man. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, hey, there's some great people there as well, but it's classic New England. I think it's funny because people are like, oh, got to be prepared for Ohio State fans. And that's certainly true. But, Boston fans are a certain breed themselves. So I felt like I was pretty prepared. Maybe not Boston College fans, but Patriots fans, Celtics fans, Red Sox fans, Bruins fans, the whole lot. So, no, it's a great place. I'd love to go back there at some time. But Columbus is great as well. It's got a lot to offer. So I'm excited to see it more.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's Andy Backstrom joining me in the co-pilot seat of the Tim May podcast. And Andy did a very good job keeping your fingers off the buttons. You didn't grab the yoke. You let me just handle this thing. And next time on, I might let you fly it a little bit more. But thanks for joining me. And ladies and gentlemen, I'll be back next week. Obviously, we don't take a week off in the Tim May podcast until maybe it's all over and done with. But that's another story for another day. But Andy Backstrom, for Andy Backstrom, this is Tim May. Until next week, we'll see you then.